Okay, welcome back to Live Marshall. This is episode 2, and I had a different idea about what I was going to do for episode 2, but I had a book come in, and because of that, I have decided to change everything around, and we're going to talk about going to the source. And I have a story for you. But first off, let me talk a little bit about this book, and I'm going to talk about another book too. So the last idea that I had that I was going to do a podcast on was a little bit controversial, and we're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. But this one could be a little controversial as well. So, first off, let's talk about who wrote the Tao, the literary source book for the Tao of Jeet Kune, of course, attributed to Bruce Lee. And this book was compiled and edited by James Bishop. Now, if you're watching the video version of this, you will see that I'm holding up the book, right? So we get a little bit of show and tell here. So this is definitely written by a gentleman who is an original JKD guy, right? And I'm wearing my original JKD shirt. If you can see it, if you're watching, it's the Junfan Gung Fu Institute, Seattle, Washington. Although I've never been there, Sifu Rafi Dadarian hosted Sigung Taki Kimura, the late great Sigung Taki Kimura, and we had him down there with his son and some of his upper level black belts, and then we had some of his upper level black belts come back to Rhode Island for a benefit for Sigung Taki Kimura at the time. So we got a whole bunch of training, and it was a great experience. But I'm also, because I just went to a combination seminar where we had Sifu Kevin Seaman come up, the Sifu Rafi Dadarian School, to teach some JKD, some Jeet Kune Do. And so I'm also going to show you, if you're watching, I'm also holding up the Junfan Gung Fu, Seeking the Path of Jeet Kune Do, Part 2 by Kevin Seaman. And so that was a great seminar as well. And you may know Sifu Kevin Seaman for Junfan Gung Fu, Seeking the Path of Jeet Kune Do, the original. So maybe to make it more controversial or less controversial, I wanted original JKD, right? And with Sifu Kevin Seaman, we certainly have the Guru Dan Inosanto line, and then we're talking about JKD concepts. So this is kind of fun. So when I was looking at the book Who Wrote the Tao, I realized something. I remembered a story, and it really made me think. And I wanted to discuss this. I want to discuss this book, but not so much the contents, but what the contents can lead you to. So we're going to go to a completely different subject for a second to be able to explain this. Okay, so this is what happened. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into personal development. But what I want to go back to is a story where I learned something. It was a chance, and I'm putting up quotes here, a chance type of a meeting. Okay, I've had a lot of chance and coincidence, and I don't know if I believe in chance or coincidence, but it may depend on how you look at things. May depend on how you look at things. If you look at it as an interesting coincidence, or if you look at it as more, I don't know, directed in some way, or maybe we're all connected to something. I don't know. I don't want to go there. You can make up your mind on those things. So what happened was back in the early, I would say kind of like the mid 1990s, my wife and I were living in an apartment that we didn't like, and we were working jobs that we didn't like, and we needed to make some changes. And I came home, and my wife said, I just saw last night, when you were at work, I just saw an infomercial by this guy by the name of Tony Robbins, right? Now, don't shut this off. I know some people hate Tony Robbins, and I'm going to talk about a guy who did not like Tony Robbins who approached me. We'll get there, right? Some people hate Tony Robbins. Some people love Tony Robbins. I think there's, good and bad in all things and all people and all, I don't think there's anything necessarily bad about Tony Robbins, but I think there can be with his approach, there's things that are going to work for you and there's things that are not going to work for you. And as Bruce Lee said, you can take what works, discard the rest, and add uniquely what's your own. I know I'm paraphrasing, but that's close, right? It's close enough. It's close enough. So stay with me because I think this is an interesting story and I think you'll get something out of it. So in those days, Tony Robbins was advertising, right next to the Flowbee on infomercials, his personal power 2, the driving force. And this system that he had set up through audio cassette and CDs, and we got the CDs, this system that he set up was a 30-day program to change your life, a 30-day program to change every area of your life. And we thought, we need that, right? We need that. My wife was kind of sold on it. She was willing to take the chance, and I was too. I had studied a lot of pop psychology back when I went to school originally, when I got my associate degree, and then later on I would get my bachelor's. But so I studied all these people, Leo Buscaglia and Dr. Wayne Dyer, and there was transactional analysis, and there was I'm okay, you're okay. And, right, I think Dr. Wayne Dyer's was your erroneous zones. And there was all this stuff. And then before that, I had been interested. I read Bradshaw. I think it was like Bradshaw on the Family or something, or Bradshaw on Your Inner Child. There was all this stuff, and it was interesting. And I was always looking for like manuals on how to make my life better. So I was like, oh, this will be fun. If nothing else, we can go through this for 30 days and hopefully it'll be enjoyable. So things didn't come as quickly back then, but we eventually got the CD set and we started to use it. And Robbins does something very simple in that set. And that is he just has you in like the first few audio or tapes or CDs or whatever you want to call it. What he does is he has you make decisions. That's all he does. He has you make decisions and then act upon them in some small way. And even that is very helpful. And we started to do that and things started to change in our lives. And I'm not going to go through the whole story here because it is kind of a long story. And so I was recruiting in the security industry. And what I'm doing is I'm going all over the place in my car and I would do open houses. So when I would do all sorts of commuting, I'd throw in these tapes or whatever, or CDs, and listen to them and try to get what I could from them and try to kind of bring myself up so I could accomplish. But what happened was one day I ended up at an open house that I had set up at a hotel. So I went to this hotel and I'm in the conference room and people, are coming in and they're filling out applications. We, of course, put ads in. They fill out applications. I'd interview them. Back then we didn't have a computer with us or anything like that. So I'd make my calls. I'd write everything down by hand with a pen or a pencil. And I would do everything I could possibly do from that location. And then you'd have lulls. You'd have slower times. So what I used to do would be I would read. Now, I wanted to be a writer, right? I wanted to be a writer. That was one of the things I wanted to do. And I wanted to write novels and short stories and stuff. But sitting there and reading, well, whether it be a novel or reading a book on writing fiction, didn't quite look right. Right? You know what I'm saying. So I would read business books, books on sales, books on self-development. And for whatever reason that day, I had Anthony Robbins' book. Actually, if we're playing show and tell, if you're watching this, you'll see that I just grabbed my Awaken the Giant Within by Anthony Robbins. And so I was reading this book and I was going through it. And I think it was this one. It could have been his other book because he had another book before this. And I'm not sure, but I think there was some sort of a graph in there, and it was, and I had to turn the book. So I was doing this, and I turned the book like this. And what happened was there was a guy who was a personal development specialist who was giving a talk. He was doing a talk or a seminar or something for some corporation, and he was doing it in the adjacent conference room from me. He had just come out on break when I was turning that book, and he came in, and I forget what the first thing he said, because he looked and he said, "I can tell by the way you're holding that book, you're a visual learner." I'm like, I was just looking at something here. I wasn't convinced. I wasn't convinced by him. And I don't know who this guy was, but he taught me something very interesting. And I think this is going to be very interesting for you. So he also came in, and he said, he may have said this first. He said, "Robbins, huh?" Right? Because he didn't like Anthony Robbins. And a lot of people in the personal development field don't like Tony Robbins for whatever reason. And I know, I have friends who hate Tony Robbins. Okay, fine. But anyway, I was using his stuff. I was looking at this, and he said, "Tony Robbins, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, I like him. I've gone through a few of his programs." And I explained how I was using Tony Robbins systems. And he said, "Well, let me tell you something about Tony Robbins." He said, "Tony Robbins, there's nothing wrong with Tony Robbins, but he's a collector. He's not an innovator." Okay. So that's what he said. He said, "Collector, not an innovator." But he said the important thing about Tony Robbins, he said, Tony Robbins, he presents the stuff like nobody else can. That's where his power is. That's where his ability is. That's where he's outstanding. He's outstanding at presenting this stuff. And he makes his audios very entertaining and very interesting to listen to. So here's what happened, right? He said, "This is what you want to do. You've gone through his programs. You know his material. We talked about it. He could tell I knew a lot of what he was talking about. So he said, okay, I'm going to give you part 2 of your journey. Your first part is you've gone through the Tony Robbins material. Now you need to go to the source." And I think you might be seeing where this is going, right? You need to go to the source. And I said, "Okay." And he said, "You need to go to the source. You need," because see, Tony Robbins, he said, collects all this stuff, but he lists his sources. He's not out there pulling from things and not saying where it comes from, right? He's not plagiarizing. If he gets something from Jim Rohn, he gets something from Jim Rohn. If he gets something from Brian Tracy, he'll tell you that he got it from Brian Tracy. If he gets it from Think and Grow Rich, he'll tell you he got it from Think and Grow Rich. He said he lists his sources. They're all listed out. Go find his sources and then read, listen, check out all of these sources. Read Think and Grow Rich from cover to cover. Take your own notes. Listen to Brian Tracy, or go see him, or Jim Rohn. I don't know if Jim Rohn was living at the time, but the basic idea is this. Go back to the sources, because all you're getting from Tony Robbins is what Tony Robbins has felt is important, right? It's what he felt was important at that time. And so he took that from, let's say, Think and Grow Rich. He took a piece or a couple pieces and he presents it to you. And so you learn that, and hopefully you utilize it. You put it into action. But there's a whole book that you haven't read. He said, go back and read that book, take notes, and maybe you'll get something different from that. And this is how you can expand. And again, I don't know who this guy was. It was very interesting, and everything seemed to just line up at the right time. And so I began doing that. I began reading other books and checking other people who Tony Robbins had pulled from. Now, if you don't get where I'm going with this yet. That's what we're talking about here with Who Wrote the Tao. Because Who Wrote the Tao is basically, and he might have even more information now elsewhere on his website, but there's like 85% of the notes. Because what happened was, if you don't know, let me just explain for the people who don't know. When Bruce Lee wrote a whole bunch of notes while he was convalescing from a back injury that happened because maybe because he didn't warm up or whatever. He was lifting something that was too heavy or whatever it was. He had a back injury. It's not like Dragon, the Bruce Lee story where he got kicked by Juan Jackman or something like that. Although, yeah, it's a great movie. Okay, I don't care what anybody says. I know it's not anywhere near accurate, but it's fun. So after Bruce Lee's untimely death, they found his notes and they compiled it into the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. And this became the main reference book for people interested in Bruce Lee's art or philosophy of Jeet Kune Do. But here's the problem. He was taking notes, and these notes were mainly from books that he was reading or from maybe people he spoke to. I haven't read this whole book, so I don't know yet. I'm gonna go through this, but it becomes extremely, extremely interesting, right? Because now what you have is you have different books that you could read to go back to the sources that Bruce Lee used. So people get angry about talking about Wing Chun, and that, some people will say, well, you don't need Wing Chun. Bruce Lee did Wing Chun, and he gave you what you needed from Wing Chun. I still think it wouldn't be a bad idea. Now, I haven't done this myself, but it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to go get a black sash or what have you in Wing Chun and have that base. And then you can see where Bruce Lee was coming from. And you can pull away anything that you don't want. Maybe there's something in Wing Chun you do want that Bruce Lee, it didn't work for him, or he didn't think would work for his students. So I think that's something that's important. Might be, tell me in the comments. I don't care. Tell me how wrong I am. So one book I have, and again, for the video viewers, it's Championship Fighting, Explosive Punching, and Aggressive Defense by the great Jack Dempsey. And what's interesting about this book is a lot of people have used it. I'm telling you right now, Boss Rutan, for those who aren't listening, who are listening in, I'm also holding up Boss Rutan's mixed martial arts workout. And some of the stuff in here, some of the information that's inside of this, he's got a little pamphlet that comes basically, I think, from Jack Dempsey's book. A lot of it is inspired by Jack Dempsey's book. So you can read Jack Dempsey's book and get a lot out of it, and get stuff maybe that Bruce Lee didn't think was important to him at the time or didn't want to emphasize. Because he's just going to give you the highlights of what he thinks is important. So that's one book that I have from the source that I pulled off the shelf. So I feel that this is extremely important, that you figure out, okay, where was Bruce Lee pulling from? And then maybe you go back to that source. You can go back to source books. You can train in source arts. And, listen, we only have so much time in the day. So we can only do so much. And you might not be interested in doing that, but you might say, well, you know what? I'm going to read Jack Dempsey's book, or I'm going to read this book. You don't have to read every book. You may not be able to. You may not have the time to do it. You may not have the time to practice, to go and say, well, I'm okay. I'm going to spend 4 years studying fencing, right? You may not, right? That may not work for you, or, spend 4 years studying Wing Chun. That may not work for you. And that's fine. That's fine. But it's just something that you can go back to. And so I'm just relating that to something that I learned. And the main thing is that it's not where these specific quotes came from, but it is. It's not these specific quotes in the Tao of Jeet Kune. It's that it tells you where the source material is, and then you can study it for yourself. That's my point. If you want, you can study the stuff for yourself, and you can go as deep as you want, or you can stay as shallow as you want. And I don't mean shallow in a bad way. I just mean, we only have so much time. You might say, okay, I'm going to really look at the boxing stuff, or I'm going to look at the fencing stuff, or what have you. Now, I also wanted to talk just for a minute about Sifu Kevin Seaman's Seeking the Path of Jeet Kune Do, Volume 2, the Junpan Gung Fu, which is the base of JKD. At least my understanding. Okay. Yeah, just complain about it in the comments. Go ahead. That's fine. And when I said, I did a review of this book, and you can find it on my website. You probably can find it on Amazon, my review. And what I said was important about that book and books like it is that you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. This happens a lot. You'll be at a seminar and a teacher will ask, what do you want me to work on? Do you have any questions? Right? And invariably, most of us, and I'm guilty of this, most of us, what do? No. We don't say anything. We go, no, I'm okay. I got it. Right? Or we're too afraid to say something, or we're too tired. It's been 6 hours. I'm ready to go home. Right? But here's the important thing. You look through a book and you see something, or you watch a video. Maybe you watch one of my videos. I always said that was the important thing. It's not necessarily whether I or somebody else can do something perfectly or even very good. What's important is that you know what this thing is and that it exists, and that maybe you know its name. That's something I try to do with my notes, right? When I take notes at a seminar, the main thing I want to know is the name, because if I can get the name, then I have power over it now, right? But if I can get the name, then I can then ask or look it up and get more information. If I have the name, or maybe even some nicknames, or what it's called, or what maybe other people in other arts do, because a lot of the stuff can be similar, I can then go and look this stuff up, and it can jog my memory. I can also go into, and this is what I was alluding to a minute ago, I could go into a seminar or in a class or a private lesson, and I can look and I can say, tell me about whatever. Okay, what's this about? What's the mousetrap principle? Right, I just saw this here. What's the mousetrap principle? Could you show me that? Or, this is my understanding of it. Am I correct? That's something that I've done myself. I would sometimes, like when I was doing Taekwondo Murukan, when I was focused, I should say, when I was focused on Taekwondo Murukan, and I wanted to gain some more forms and maybe work towards another rank test or something. So I would look and I would find the form online. And I'd say, okay, I went through this, but this is an advanced form and I forgot about it. And I'd start working on it again. But then what I would do, and I would do that at home, of course, and then I'd go see a friend of mine, a master level in TKD, and I would say, would you watch this? Right. And I'd show him, and then he'd say, okay, well, this is how we do it, or you're doing it wrong, or you're doing this part wrong. And usually it was mainly, oh, well, you just want to sink your legs a little bit more there. And he'd give me little tweaks, but for the most part, I was able to get it. So the important thing here is where knowledge is, people say knowledge is power, knowledge is the potential of power. There's a lot of knowledge here. And you can't really learn from a book, but you can get a lot of information. And sometimes it'll jog your memory, right? A book like this is great because you go to a seminar and then you look through the book and you find what you were working on in that seminar. Or maybe you do it through a video. You watch that video and you go, oh, we were working on that. I have firsthand experience practicing that. And then you watch and you gain something else from it. or it jogs your memory and you go, oh yeah, I forgot, I didn't put that in my notes. And now you can pull that out and work on it. So that's where this stuff, I think, is very important. So this is just my way of explaining why books like this are important, because they show you what's available. They show you the sources. They show you what you can do to then go out and improve yourself. And that's what we're trying to do all the time. We're trying to improve ourselves. So I hope this will help you in your journey of figuring out what's out there and going back to the source. Now, if you like this podcast, you can, certainly listen to us all different ways. We're going to be on Spotify and all these different Apple Music and Amazon Music and all of these things. So you can find Live Marshall on all of these different podcast platforms. And you can watch us on YouTube, and I think Spotify will have the video version as well. I do thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope you will subscribe. And here's my new catchphrase as we end episode 2 of Live Marshall. No matter what you do, live Marshall. I'll talk to you next time.